Now, if the bubble bursts, I mean, does it have any effect? No. When the bubble moves, it looks cool when it moves, and I can give it names. Okay, so I can give the bubble names. But now there's even more interesting bubbles. There's bubbles that shine. I mean, I saw a shiny bubble. I said, "Ooh, you're beautiful. A pretty shiny bubble. I like that shiny bubble more." I mean, but now the bubble burst. So was the shiny bubble of any consequence? No. The bubble was just a shiny bubble. I mean, it wasn't anything else. Did it actually exist even? Apparently it did, but I mean, there's a new bubble that's interesting now. Let me shake the water again. Then, when the bubbles are bursting, an interesting thing started to happen to me. I was wondering, if I shake myself as the water, will I make bubbles? And you know what happened? I made bubbles. Because, I mean, I'm the water shaking the water. So if I'm the water shaking the water, I can make bubbles. So, does that change anything? It's still bubbles. I mean, what happens to the bubble when the bubble bursts? It's still the same thing. It's just nothing. So, looking at it. I started getting worried about these bubbles bursting because I liked my bubbles. I mean, I wanted to keep my bubbles, but I mean, they keep on bursting. So, and I started looking at this bubble, and whenever I looked at the bubble, I started to worry, I'm going to lose the bubble. I started shaking. And then when I was shaking about losing my bubble, I was creating more bubbles. That's so cruel, isn't it? So all I have to do is worry about losing my bubble, and then I shake and I create more bubbles. That's a cool thing. What shall we call it? Fear. Oh, that's a cool thing. I mean, I can create more bubbles. All I need to do is shake. How do I shake? Just worry about a bubble. Okay, let me worry about a bubble. Bubble, which bubbles will I worry about? Let me create lots of bubbles to worry about, then I can shake a lot, and then I can create a lot of bubbles. I mean, and as long as there's a bubble, I don't have to worry about the bubbles that's bursting. I mean, all I have to have, I've got enough bubbles, and I'm creating enough bubbles. I mean, I'm shaking. There's more bubbles, there's more bubbles, there's more bubbles. Okay, now, can bubbles? Maybe I can talk to a bubble, blah, 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 bubble. I can talk to a blah, 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 bubble. I can blah, 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 bubble about a bubble. And let's bubble about a bubble. I mean, it can bubble about a bubble. And when I bubble about a bubble, bubbles start to bubble with each other. I mean, they are blah, 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 bubbling with each other. So, how's that possible? Oh, because they're shaking. I mean, when you're bubbling about a bubble, I mean, you're shaking one bubble, and from that bubble there's a shaking going. It goes and it starts to shake other bubbles as well, and they all start to shake together. And when they start to shake together, they start to come closer together. And when they start to connect, they start to become another bubble, and they start to form their own bubbles. Oh God! Now I have bubbles forming bubbles. I have invented new bubbles. Bubbles that can make bubbles. Bubbles that can't exist without bubbles, because they want to have more bubbles. I mean, where am I now in all of this? Pretty soon, I am so mesmerized with all my bubbles, what happens? I start to believe I am this bubble. And I'm shaking as this bubble, and before long, I'm living in a bubble. So, then I start to realize a fascinating thing. Who I am in a bubble needs someone else also in a bubble before I can make more bubbles. So, I get someone else. We come together as one bubble, and then small bubbles form. A new way of making bubbles. But we're still shaking. Up and down, up and down, up and down. Shake, 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 shake. Shake, 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 shake. And now I have taken shake to a new way of shaking. I mean, I can now shake and make small bubbles even when I'm in a bubble. Wow! Am I like fucking cool or what? So, while I'm making these bubbles, I find an interesting thing, that I'm all together with my little bubbles in a big bubble. So I, with the special bubble, which became one bubble, has now made small bubbles, and they're all still in one bubble called a family bubble. So now we're in this family bubble, and this is a special bubble. I mean, this bubble is different to all the other bubbles, because this bubble is the bubble we made. I mean, we made this bubble, and we made the small bubbles, and we must make sure the small bubbles look different to the other bubbles. I mean, the fact that these bubbles are going to burst, we mustn't worry about it. All we have to do is keep on creating more bubbles, because then even if the bubbles burst, we'll still be here in some way, because in some way this bubble we've made is still us. We just don't know exactly how, but it's still us. I mean, so we just keep on making more bubbles. Okay, let's make bubbles. Let's shake together. Shake, 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 shake. Let's find more ways to shake. The more we can shake, the more bubbles we can make. The more bubbles we can make, the less we have to worry about bubbles. I mean, even if the bubbles burst, I mean, there'll be new bubbles. So therefore we don't have to worry about losing bubbles, because we'll have new bubbles. And all we have to do is shake, and there's bubbles, and bubbles, and bubbles. But in the end, if all the bubbles burst, what do you have? Hey? The same as you always had. So, is all this bubbling worth anything? Is all these bubbles with names worth anything? But why can't you remember when you shake the first time? But you keep on shaking, so somewhere you're remembering it was all about shaking. I mean, whether you are pumping for children, or pumping for water, or pumping to eat, I mean, all of it is a form of pumping, a form of shaking. Whatever you're doing, you're shaking. Whenever you're moving, you're shaking. So, you keep on shaking. So, somewhere you must have started shaking. So, why are you shaking? You even shake extensively just before the bubble burst. I mean, that's where the shaking gets quite bad. I mean, but just before the bubble bursts, you shake extensively. Is that because you're returning to your shaking self? I mean, is that where you go back to the point of where you actually you're supposed to remember that you were shaking? So where did this all come from? This theory of everything. The bubbles of all bubbles. How the bubble work. What the bubble is all about. Why the bubble burst. And why the bubble is going to burst. Because the bubble must burst. Because the bubble is a bubble. I mean, it's never been anything else but a bubble. So because the bubble is a bubble will burst. Therefore, to worry about the bubble that bursts will only cause you to shake, and then you create more bubbles, and then all those bubbles burst, and at the end of the day, you just end up with the same thing, which is, the bubble will burst. So, what is the point about the bubble then? The point to burst, yes. What is the point about shaking? If you stop shaking, what's going to happen? Are you going to get back to yourself then? Because there's no more bubbles. And this all happened, interestingly enough, as I said, with a child 3.5 years old that came through and asked for impressions. But even the child was already accepting the bubbles, as if the bubble is what it's all about. So now, all the child's going to do is burst the bubbles.